Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Up front this week, New Mexico is facing another drought, and that has major implications for one of the state's largest industries, agriculture. Farming uses most of the state's water, and with less surface water available, there's been a lot more pumping of our precious groundwater. In depth, here's Madison Staten.
For 45 years, Edmund Ogaz has worked the fields of his Garfield farm. A self-proclaimed jack of all trades, he can be found planting chili, growing pecans, and harvesting onions. But a lack of water has significantly impacted how Ogaz irrigates his crops. When he first started farming, water from the local irrigation district was enough to sustain his farm. Now, Ogaz has had to rely on groundwater pumping, a practice that has become increasingly more common statewide.
We'd start irrigating from the irrigation district in February or early March. We were already had water in the irrigation system from the river. But now, like this year, we're not going to get water till the 1st of June.
Ogaz has worked to conserve water, and in the practice of planting multiple crops on the same land. He's also taken steps to protect his crops from the increased salt content of groundwater, applying different kinds of fertilizers to fight against the salinity.
When you're used to just getting river water, which is high quality water, you gotta readjust certain things. But I wish I could have river water every day. I wouldn't have some of the water quality problems that I'm having now.
Sam Fernald, the director of the Water Resources Research Institute at New Mexico State University, says that conditions have gotten drier, leading to a lack of water for agricultural use.
Farmers regularly get 3 feet of water for irrigation. But some years now we're seeing, like in 2013 they got 3 inches. And this year they're getting 4 inches. So that's 1/10 of the water.
Fernald attributes the harsher conditions in part to rising temperatures associated with climate change. Average temperatures in New Mexico have risen more than 3 degrees since the 1970s, something that has led to heat drought.
Because of that increased temperature, there's something called heat drought, where you get the same amount of precipitation. This is in the upper watersheds that feed the Rio Grande, and you get the same amount of precipitation, but because of the increased temperature, you get more evaporation.
Executive Director of the New Mexico Chili Association, Joram Robs, stressed that cuts to non-essential water use in urban areas can help save water for agricultural needs.
A chili plant will take around 50 gallons of water per season. If they get water cuts, they might not be able to plant as much chili. We're charged with feeding more and more people on less land, using less water and less natural resources every single year.
And adapting to the changing conditions isn't just impacting large farms. Smaller operations are having to adjust as well. Operations like Ulrike West's Wild West Berry Farm in Las Cruces. Even on West's small farm, the impacts of drought are undeniable.
When those drought conditions started, our well ran dry. So it's 450 feet deep. There is no water.
Now reliant on water from a utility service, West has worked to conserve as much as possible. It's one reason she began using special growing boxes, requiring less water.
I needed a lot less water in those boxes than what I needed on the ground inside of my garden. I've decided I do the investment to see if I can convince those strawberry plants, those dear little things, to be happy above ground in those earth boxes.
Depending on the season, Wild West Berry Farm can require up to 26,000 gallons of water a month. West says that if drought conditions continue to grow harsher, she will not be able to expand her business. Though willing to put her personal expansion plans on hold, West says she worries about the potential need for increased water rationing and the impact it would have on the agricultural industry.
I just pray that God is gracious and gives us enough water.
Water Resources Research Institute Director Sam Fernald sees opportunities for smart water planning that can help farmers navigate drought conditions.
Right now the Rio Grande is dry. If you carefully coordinate the management of the reservoirs, maybe tweak some of the ways that reservoir water is stored in northern and southern New Mexico, work with the farmers to see what their irrigation needs are, you can add aquatic ecosystem value to the river and maintain all those other values.
For KRWG Public Media, I'm Madison Staten.
The Physical Science Laboratory sits on 7 acres at New Mexico State University's Las Cruces campus. It supports the development and application of new and existing technologies. It was founded way back in 1946 in response to the nation's space and rocket programs. Since then, PSL has grown to support activities across the globe. Today's expertise at PSL includes electronic warfare, cybersecurity, missile systems, aerospace, and scientific ballooning. Partnerships include the Department of Defense, NASA, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and more. PSL is marking 75 years of history, and joining me today is PSL Director Eric Sanchez and PSL retiree Bernie McCune. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you, Fred, for having us.
Bernie, give me a sense of what it was like to work at PSL. I understand you actually had 5 careers there.
Yes, I actually started in 1965, and I was working with a group called Satellite Ground Instrumentation at PSL, and I graduated out of NMSU and went straight, came across the street to this place straight away. And satellite tracking in those days was Navy navigational satellites, and so we were using co-op students from NMSU, and we were being sent all over the place. My first site was up at Oregon Pass, so I didn't go very far the first little bit because we had a tracking station up there with a astronomical. I mean, they were firing lasers at satellites, and so we were tracking the same satellites. But from there it was the Seychelles, and from there it was. I went to Europe, to Spain, to Japan, all over the place, and we always had co-op students that whole time. I started out in 65, I went to 70, and then came back and quit PSL for a short time, but then I was back at it in 73, and so in Japan. So it was quite a neat thing for all of us, not just me, and as long ago as 65.
And Bernie, I know you're very passionate about this and you're working to preserve PSL's history. Tell me about that.
It started, the history project started in the 80s with Ramo Baumgartner. He was a sounding rocket guy, but he had retired or was about to retire. And so he wanted to save our history. And he was mostly working on oral history types of things and a book. And so he went quite a ways, but he finally had some health problems. And so I picked up from him probably in the 90s. And we finally published, we have a book that we produced, and it was on the web in a digital form, and I'm told that the lab is going to start getting students to help us do that again, get it back up on the web, so that people can actually read our history. I mean, it's pretty interesting from 46 until 71 or 2 for this book, and then I'm working on a second book that's in draft stage. So I've got a lot more to do. I don't know if I got a lot more time to do it, but there's a lot to do.
Okay, so a lot of history, a lot of things happening today as well. Eric, what should people know about the PSL of today?
I'll start out saying that we're very adaptive and very agile. If you look at COVID-19, we had to react like everybody else did, but we never fully shut down, but we did, reduce the amount of people that were inside Anderson Hall, but still were able to make the mission happen. So I would say that to begin with. Strategically, our goals and vision are in line with LEADS 2025. So we work closely with the university to make sure that we're on par with where they're trying to go, and we're helping them get there from our perspective. And then finally, just that we have 3 divisions. You mentioned the missions that we have, but we have the Information Sciences and Security Systems Division. We have Telemetry Missile Systems Division and Aerospace Division. So 3 division directors as well as a production capability.
And give us a sense, Eric, of how important this work is to national security.
I would say very important. Our Information Sciences and Security Systems Division works closely with the Army and other services on their vulnerability and survivability assessment of new weapon systems. So, if they can't survive in a test, they're definitely not going to survive when they get out to the warfighter. So that's very important. Our support to missile testing, the Missile Defense Agency, as well as the newly stood up Space Force. So we do a lot of work with them. So strategically, very important. And then our unmanned aerial system support that we provide to the FAA as well as Department of Defense is very important to national defense and homeland security.
You mentioned Space Force, which is, of course, a new effort by the federal government. Does this mean that we might be seeing PSL involved with work at some point at Spaceport America?
Potentially with Spaceport America, we actually do some of our UAS testing, our unmanned aerial systems, based on the elevation and altitudes that they can go to. We often have to work closely with them, so that's already ongoing. As far as the Space Force goes, so there is a small contingent already at White Sands Missile Range, if you weren't aware of that. And we've done some testing out at Wallops Island in Virginia that supported some things that the Space Force is interested in.
And of course, for folks who aren't familiar with UAS or unmanned aerial systems, they're drones, right?
Correct.
Okay, and that's something that folks are very familiar with on the consumer market, maybe less so, but not certainly an issue that's more well known, that the military uses drones extensively. And we've heard about drones being tested at Holloman Air Force Base for the work that they do for the military. Speaking of important work, Eric, tell me about the current opportunities for students at PSL.
Well, first I want to start out by talking from 1946 until present. We did a little check on this, and we've had up to 20,000 students that have come through over that time period. And currently we have about 25 students that are working in the facility, and that ranges from our security team, our information technology team, our shipping and receiving, our IT, as well as our facilities support. And then all 3 of our division directors have at least one and many more in some divisions, students that are supporting their efforts as well.
20,000, that's a lot of students.
It is.
That's pretty exciting. Bernie, you talked about this in one of your answers earlier, that there were always students involved when you worked at PSL for many, many years. Give me a sense of student involvement when you were at PSL, the kinds of experiences students could have working there.
Well, it was even before my time in 46. This whole place started with basically students. I mean, there were very few staff at that time doing data reduction on V2s. So, I mean, students started the lab, and we had probably 30 or 40 students before we had any staff. But in my case, and those were really data, they were running calculators, they were, doing plots for the V2. In my time was these kids, I mean, they were really mature off the farm, some of them who were really capable with their hands, that were running tracking stations, satellite tracking stations, running generators, communication systems. And so in Argentina, I was the only staff member, and I had 11 students down there. We were running the communications van, the tracking van, the diesel generator sets, because the power was different down there. We had to have our own diesels. And so if I didn't have good students, I would have not been able to carry out that mission for sure. So yeah, I mean, students have been with us for a long time, and I think our hope is that we get some more in here because they're really great.
And I'm guessing, Bernie, that this really is incredible for education, for their education, that they learn a lot at PSL, but career-wise, it also might help them down the line in deciding what they want to do.
Well, I mean, it helps them career-wise if they get out in the field. They're electrical engineers, and they're working with scopes. They're working with equipment. They can come back to their labs and guide the lab. So the whole thing with students that in their career choice is that I think, as soon as they graduate from here and they have this co-op experience, they're grabbed right up. I mean, it's just incredible that their opportunities go way up, I think.
So it's not just a matter of them getting a better focus on what they want to do. This also makes them more marketable.
It does. I mean, it's really a few of my students with me in satellite tracking found out they wanted to be writers and not. I mean, they were traveling, and so they weren't really as much interested in the technical side. But most of them, it focused them really well. And that's a type of focus.
And we shouldn't downplay that, right? I mean, that's valuable too. Sometimes when you have an internship, you learn, well, this is interesting, but I don't want to do this for 30 or 40 years.
That's right.
Right? Eric, I want to move to another point here, and that is the incredible place really where we live in terms of the connection to PSL. We're close to White Sands Missile Range, Fort Bliss, and NASA. Tell me about those connections with PSL.
Yeah, definitely a connection with White Sands Missile Range. If you look at the history from 1946, White Sands Proving Grounds is where it all started, and the support to the V2 rocket program that was mentioned earlier. I still think that White Sands is really the hub when you look at some of our key partners, the Army, the Navy, Missile Defense Agency, and other key tenants that are part of White Sands. That's where the majority of our work comes from. And NASA happens to be one of those tenants as well. So, of course, we work closely with them. Fort Bliss, they're more of an operational post. So don't do as much with them directly, but indirectly, the work that we do ultimately gets to those warfighters. I do want to go back, if I could, on the student piece. We have a program called the Classified Ready Employee Workforce Program that we just stood up last year. And it gets after exactly what you were talking about, a co-op program where these students get the opportunity to work closely with either industry, work here within PSL, work with the national labs. And then on the back end of that, they leave here with a clearance, and that just makes them very, very marketable. We're really proud of that program and getting ready to start our second cohort in the fall.
Sounds great. I didn't get a chance to ask you, Eric. I mean, how did you become interested in this field?
Actually, I started here at New Mexico State University, but I went through the education department, and then I went on active duty. I was also in ROTC while I was here. Went on active duty and did 32 years with my last duty assignment as a commanding general of White Sands Missile Range. So I knew I wanted to come back to New Mexico State and do something. I didn't know what that was going to be. And then this just kind of happened, and it's a perfect fit with my background, in test and evaluation, working at White Sands, as well as my time in the military and all the support that we give to the Department of Defense.
Sounds like you have had quite an interesting life.
It's been interesting.
I bet. Speaking of interesting things, Bernie, earlier you told us that you've already published a book about PSL and you're working on another. Tell me about the new book and how it's different and what you've covered in these books about PSL.
The old book is really about programs, people, clearly their stories, but it's really some of the early programs that were pretty famous. V2, Viking, Vanguard, launching satellites, telemetry, things that we used to do for all the satellite programs, and down at the Cape, and some of the military stuff out in California. But the second book is a little bit different. We're kind of bursting at the seams with the number of people we had during that period from 71 to on through about 2006 is what I've gotten to. And it was a lot of students still. We still had a lot of students coming through, but there was a lot more computer stuff that we did in support of the government, and some interesting shuttle types of programs that we supported. And so a bunch of NASA work. And then the balloon program started with the Air Force balloon program out at Holloman. And I was kind of a section chief for that program. I helped run that as a smaller program. But then from that, we had enough experience where we jumped into the NASA balloon program, which was huge. And I'm trying to get that all covered in the second book. So there's just a whole bunch of interesting things that happened. It's just was a little more frantic, and it wasn't quite as paced as we were in the early days.
Interesting stuff. And you mentioned the V2. You can see that at the White Sands Missile Range Museum, right? Yes,
there's a really excellent. They've completely refurbished the thing. It's really a neat thing. And what we need to do is get the story out about, we were feeding data to von Braun, PSL was that, PSL was heavily involved in the actual flights, and the first book has all those flights listed, and we were almost on all of them.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, I've been out to that museum to see the V2, and it is well worth making a trip out there. I really enjoyed that, but didn't know the connection with PSL until now. Eric, we've talked about a lot of history here in the book. Yes, read the book. We've talked about a lot of history, Eric, but to conclude our time together today, we have a couple of minutes left, and so hopefully that's enough time. I'm sure you get this question a lot, what does the future look like for PSL?
The future's bright. We're looking at investments. The first investment is the workforce. Making sure that we're giving them what they need, so that as new technologies are coming on board, they're able to do the things they need to do. Internally, technologies that keep pace with the test and evaluation world and what's going on out there, and then really looking for strategic partnerships to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success. And we're looking at hypersonics, next generation telemetry and missile systems, cybersecurity, the reactivation of our classified area here within Anderson Hall, and so the future is really bright. We're really excited.
Do you expect, Eric, that we're going to see an increased focus on cybersecurity? We've all seen lately in the news because of a number of terrible attacks that have occurred, and even ransomware attacks, that this seems to be becoming a much, much bigger priority at every level of government.
So even prior to that, the government had put out requirements for all contracts associated with the federal government. So we are already posturing to meet those requirements. And that now it's just, it looks like it's going to be even more rigorous than what we are already focused on. But we are in the process of meeting a certain level that the government has imposed on contractors. And so, yeah, we're definitely headed in that direction, and that will continue for the future, for sure.
Yeah, and of course, people should be aware, if they aren't already, that there is a cybersecurity program at New Mexico State, so students can learn more about this and launch themselves into a very important and lucrative career.
And we've hired a couple of those students into the IT department here, and I'll tell you what, they're doing great things.
That is great to hear, and another great opportunity for young people. It's one of the nice things about living in a place where there's always new things happening, new educational programs, and of course all the great work that's going on at PSL. Eric and Bernie, thanks for sharing a bit of this with us today, what's happening now, what could happen in the future, and of course, Bernie, the great history of PSL. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate it.
That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio every weekday. It's morning edition, 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News, always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.